Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you, Mr. McGovern. The Biden administration has taken every opportunity to strengthen the controlling and stifling grip they have on America. Indeed, the expanse of the regulatory state is only outmatched by the radicalism. From the energy sector to home loans, this administration has used red tape and executive authority to realize the goals of woke activists at the expense of everyday Americans. President Biden co-opted the vision of anti-energy radicals even before he entered office, when he vowed to end fossil fuel amidst thunderous applause. His administration made good on that promise to wage a war on energy. They canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. They halted court-ordered offshore lease sales, paused exports on liquefied natural gas. Everyday Americans and the energy-producing states continue to pay the price for this administration's outright hostility toward the very means by which we unlocked modern life. The president also made proponents of woke redistributive schemes happy when his administration advanced a set of mandates that punished credit-worthy home buyers and forced them to subsidize riskier loans. A January 2023 federal housing finance agency directive increased fees for half of all borrowers with credit scores over 680, while decreasing fees for 90% of those under 680. Nearly 19 out of every 20 Americans have scores above the 680 threshold. That action sent a clear message which wasn't lost on middle-class Americans. If you work hard, if you pay your debts, the Biden administration wants you to subsidize the mortgages of those who did not make the same sacrifices that you did. This is the opposite of the American dream. Suffice it to say, Americans are keenly aware of the marching orders President Biden gave his administration. Embrace fringe ideas, fervently thrust them upon the populace, and leave them with the consequences. House Republicans will do everything we can to disrupt this cycle of punitive non sequiturs. That's why we're here today. The Biden administration has also exhibited a disturbing trend to surrendering to Green New Deal devotees to the detriment of everyday people. They put internal combustion engines and gas stoves, tools households across the country depend upon, in their regulatory crosshairs. Now the Biden Department of Energy is acting outside the scope of its authority to pursue a woke energy conservation agenda that harms American consumers. For example, their recent efficiency standards for residential clothes washers will increase the already high cost of such appliances while, according to their own analysis, saving Americans about $9 over the lifetime of the appliance. H.R. 6192, the Hands Off Our Home Appliance Act, will cut to the heart of the President Biden's overzealous regulatory agenda. The bill reforms the Department of Energy's procedures for issuing energy efficiency standards by prohibiting the Secretary of Energy from prescribing any new or amended energy conservation standard for a product that is not technologically feasible nor economically justified. But the Biden administration's effort to expand executive overreach isn't just limited to the home. In 2022, the Securities and Exchange Commission issued a guidance which would make it economically impracticable for a company to hold a customer's cryptocurrency. They took an opportunity to reduce confusion and turned it into a new policy, all the while limiting the ability of two consenting parties to engage in a financial transaction. That is the very definition of executive overreach. H.J. Res. 109 provides for congressional disapproval of the SEC's attempt to disguise new policy as guidance. It also reasserts this chamber's authority in the rulemaking process. In the same spirit, we will revisit H.R. 2925, the Mining Regulatory Clarity Act. The destructive efforts of the executive branch have also been aided by allies in the judicial branch. In 2022, the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit's Rosemont decision upended 40 years of mining regulatory precedent and over a century of interpretation of the mining law of 1872. We cannot let radical environmentalists and ivory tower judges dictate whether America's natural resources will uplift American communities. H.R. 2925 will right the wrongs of the Rosemont decision. Additionally, the committee will consider H.R. 7109, the Equal Representation Act. For far too long, non-citizens have been included in the calculations that determine the apportionment of seats in the House of Representatives and the distribution of presidential electors. They are not able to vote, but as it stands now, their very presence can have an outsized effect and unfairly skew federal representation away from American citizens. What's more, President Biden's self-inflicted border crisis has added a disturbing angle to this issue because localities sympathetic to the president's agenda, particularly those so-called sanctuary jurisdictions, are poised to directly benefit. This isn't hyperbole, and it is only getting worse. Since President Biden took office, there have been over 9 million illegal crossings. That number exceeds the population of 39 states. On this administration's watch, more illegal immigrants have crossed our border than the populations of 78% of the states in the Union. The People's House must act to ensure that the principle of one person, one vote remains. H.R. 7109 does that by directing the Census Bureau to include a question on the census for responders to indicate whether they're a citizen of the United States. It also amends existing statute to ensure that citizens and only citizens are included in the population of a state for the purposes of reapportionment in the House and determining the number of electors for president. I'm certain we'll have quite a robust debate on these issues, and as always, I look forward to it and look forward to the opportunity for the House to work its will. I'll now yield to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I can't wait till you guys are no longer in charge. Today, the committee will consider 4 measures, 3 for the first time and 1 for the second time after Republican leadership suffered an embarrassing procedural defeat on the House floor last week. First is H.R. 6192, the Hands Off Our Home Appliance Act. Republicans noticed a Rules Committee meeting on this bill weeks ago, but they were essentially shamed into pulling it from the agenda after they realized a bill on home appliances doesn't really meet the moment considering all of the real crises that we have going on here in the United States and around the world. But I guess their shame only lasted a week. By the way, appliances in this country are getting more energy efficient. And I can't believe I need to say this, but that's a good thing. That's a good thing. It lowers utility bills, and it puts money back into the pockets of everyday people. And it's not happening by accident. It's happening because of strong rules and regulations adopted by Congress and our federal agencies to protect consumers and enhance efficiency. Why Republicans want to undo all of that is beyond me. I can only assume it's another favor for their corporate sponsors that call the shots. To claim that any of this is about consumer choice is just nuts. The only choice they're giving people here is to pay more on their utility bills. Second is H.R. 7109, the Equal Representation Act, a Republican attempt to rig the census and ignore the Constitution's requirement that we count everyone, not just some people, but all people. Next is H.J. Res. 109, a Congressional Review Act, which would potentially prevent the SEC from issuing staff guidance on cryptocurrency. No idea which Republican donor or lobbyist asked for that, but here it is. And finally is H.R. 2925, the Mining Regulatory Clarity Act of 2024. Again, last week, the House agreed in a bipartisan vote on the floor to send this bill back to the Natural Resources Committee with instructions to report it back with an amendment offered by Ms. Ledger-Fernandez. That amendment, the Ledger-Fernandez amendment, would have modified this bill to ban companies from foreign adversary nations from conducting mining activities on America's public lands. It would stop them from exploiting American resources and polluting our public lands, and then profiting off those resources and forcing the American taxpayer to do the cleanup. As you know, Mr. Chairman, her motion passed. So I'm a little puzzled why this bill is back before the Rules Committee and not the Natural Resources Committee. And since I won't have the opportunity to question the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, I'm going to use this opportunity to ask for some clarification. And I'm happy to yield to you, Mr. Chairman, to explain if you think it's a good idea for Republican leaders to just ignore the House's vote and send this bill not to the Natural Resources Committee, but right back to the Rules Committee.
Gentlemen, we yield. I think the Natural Resources has acted on this bill. Their preference was known to us last week when we had the original hearing on this, and I think it's appropriate to bring it back to the floor, and I'll yield back.
Yeah, and I guess what that answer ignores is the fact that the House had a vote. You know, clearly a bipartisan majority in the House thought Ms. Ledger-Fernandez had a good idea. And she moved on the House floor to recommit the bill back to the Natural Resources Committee, not the Rules Committee. And instead of doing what the House directed, Republican leaders said this is coming right back to the Rules Committee and totally bypassing the committee it was supposed to go to. I mean, what's the point here? Is it to avoid debating the Ledger-Fernandez amendment or what? I'm just trying to understand, like, the House voted in a bipartisan way to do a certain thing, and we're not doing that here. Is there a reason for that?
Well, the gentleman yield.
Yeah, happy to yield.
The House will have its opportunity to vote again this week, and I look for a positive outcome.
Look, this is an important issue that deserves debate. And if Republicans want to make the case that Chinese corporations should be allowed to plunder our public lands and resources for free, they should send it back to the Natural Resources Committee to make that case. But I guess that's not going to happen here. We're just going to pretend like the vote on the House floor didn't happen. I guess that's how regular order works under this majority. Votes only matter if they like the outcome. And to add insult to injury, last year we heard on and on from the other side that Joe Biden was, quote, betraying America by letting China purchase American oil. Now Republicans want to let Chinese companies come in and extract minerals from our public lands and then force Americans to clean up the mess that they leave behind. Now, I'd love to hear how my friends on the other side contort themselves to explain this obvious contradiction, but I don't think that we have the time. So this is all just more of the same from this failed Republican majority. It's all about partisan warfare. Instead of actually working with Democrats to get stuff done. And what really is concerning, it really is about ignoring the rules and the procedures and the processes of this House, ignoring the will of a bipartisan majority of Congress in this case. I mean, the Rules Committee, as I said last week, should be renamed the Break the Rules Committee, because that's what we seem to be doing every week that we meet. And I think it's regrettable. I think it's regrettable not just because I don't think it's fair, and not just because it doesn't respect the will of the majority in this House. I think it's regrettable because I think it further demeans this institution. And with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman for his remarks, and gentleman yields back. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses have will be included into the record. And I do want to welcome our first panel, Subcommittee Chairman Jeff Duncan and Ranking Member Frank Pallone from the Committee on Energy and Commerce. Subcommittee Chairman Duncan, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Burgess, and congratulations on taking the gavel. It's a well-deserved honor. And I want to thank you and Ranking Member McGovern for recognizing me to speak in support of Congresswoman Lesko's bill, H.R. 6192, the Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act, which will help stop the Biden administration's war on Americans' home appliances. This bill is considered today will reform the Department of Energy's appliance and equipment standards, setting process and protect several commonly used home appliances, including dishwashers, air conditioners, refrigerators, clothes dryers, and washing machines. H.R. 6192 has gone through regular order. That means it's gone through the committee process. Through hearings and markups in the Energy and Commerce Committee, it's become clear that Congress must act to prevent the Biden administration from banning natural gas appliances and eliminating product features that the American people rely on. Through sue and settlement agreements with the environmental groups, the DOE has aggressive plans to regulate the sale of more than 60 categories of appliances and equipment. The DOE may ban and restrict access to thousands of household products that Americans can purchase today to heat our homes, prepare our meals, and wash our clothes. The DOE's appliance standards program is big government on steroids. The Biden administration and Democrats want to tell you what type of car to drive, how much water you can use in your shower, and how to cook your food. My constituents, like many Americans, were shocked to learn that the Department of Energy could abuse its authority to ban gas stoves. Thankfully, Congress came together, and we passed legislation to overturn the gas stove ban with a strong bipartisan vote last year. There's plenty of precedent for Congress to step in. In recent years, Congress has passed laws to clarify DOE's authorities to regulate light bulbs, ceiling fans, refrigerators, air conditioners, heat pumps, water heaters, furnaces, dishwashers, and the list goes on and on and on. The fact that Congress has to step in so many times over the years demonstrates that the efficiency standard setting process is fundamentally broken, and it's no longer serving the interests of the American people. H.R. 6192, the Hands Off Our Appliances Act, will fix this fundamentally broken standard setting process. The legislation will clarify DOE's authority to regulate, and it will prohibit standards that are not cost-effective or technologically feasible. This bill will ensure that DOE conducts a true cost-benefit analysis and considers the harmful impact that cost increases will have on the low-income households, on renters, and those struggling to afford a new home and the appliances that come in it. H.R. 6192 will also ensure that if an appliance with an efficiency upgrade costs more money up front, then American consumer will actually save a significant amount of energy, enough to pay back the cost of that increase within 3 years. Finally, H.R. 6192 will prohibit the DOE from banning natural gas appliances and taking away product and performance features that we rely upon as Americans. These reforms are necessary to protect the affordability and reliability of home appliances and prevent the DOE from abusing its statutory authority. It's imperative that Congress act now to reform the DOE Appliance Standard Program. The Department of Energy just issued a series of proposed and finalized rules that exceed the DOE's statutory authority. In recent months, the DOE has announced plans to impose burdensome new regulations that will raise the price and reduce the performance of dishwashers, air conditioners, refrigerators, clothes dryers, and washing machines. The DOE has failed to demonstrate the need for these new regulations, and it's failed to show that they are cost-effective and technologically feasible. Now, I think it's imperative to get in the record what the Secretary of Energy said just last week. Secretary Granholm said in our budget hearing last week, quote, "We are obsessed with reducing the amount of energy Americans use." But I would ask, at what cost? Congress must act to stop the Biden administration and the DOE from waging war on our home appliances. With the cost of everything increasing as a result of runaway inflation caused by the Biden administration's reckless spending policies, the last thing the DOE should be doing is making home appliances that Americans rely on every day even more expensive. The proposed ban on gas stoves was a wake-up call. The Biden administration should put affordability and reliability above the interest of the radical climate lobby. These bills in front of us today do just that, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in sending another strong message to the Biden administration to keep their hands off our home appliances. It's common sense, and I look forward to answering your questions. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Burgess. I'd like to include my statement for the record, but I'm going to try to
That
summarize.
objection's ordered.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me congratulate you on becoming the chair of the Rules Committee and wish you the best in that capacity. But I have to disagree with what both you and Chairman Duncan said about this legislation, and I wrote down some of the things that were said. Legislation was considered a response to radicalism by the Department of Energy or by the Democrats. I don't think there's anything radical about trying to have more efficient appliances and saving money for consumers. statement was made about how the efficiency standards exceed executive authority. It's simply not the case. I mean, the fact of the matter is, for years, the Department of Energy has been obliged under the statute to look at efficiency and establish more efficiency standards with the cooperation of the manufacturers and industry. That's what they do. We can't, as congressmen, legislate every detail of energy efficiency. We have to leave it up to the agencies to do that, and that's exactly what they do in this case and in every case when they've had to look at energy efficiency standards in the past. A statement was made about how middle-class Americans, are going to suffer. I think middle-class Americans want energy efficiency and lower-cost appliances. And the fact of the matter is, look, this bill, and I know some of you quoted this, you said that in the summary of the bill, it says that it will ban or any new appliance standards that are not technologically feasible and economically justifiable. Well, that's exactly what the existing law does. It requires the Department of Energy to look at what's technologically feasible and what's economically justifiable. And so it's very much, the bill is really kind of duplicative, in my opinion, of what the Energy Department already does. In terms of cost savings, just to give you some example, let's set the record straight. Energy conservation standards save consumers money. The Biden administration energy efficiency actions are estimated to provide $1 trillion in consumer savings over 30 years. Recently finalized standards for water heaters will save American households about $7.6 billion per year on their energy and water bills. Recently finalized refrigerator standards will save Americans $36.4 billion over 30 years of sales. And then there's an $18 billion savings through the clothes washer standard and a $21 billion savings from clothes dryers. These are real numbers. These are the numbers that when the department is trying to decide what to do, they look at and come to that conclusion. It's real money that saves Americans in their wallets. And there's again, as Chairman Duncan said, that he wants to include with this bill a cost-benefit analysis. That's exactly what the department does now. They do a cost-benefit analysis of what's going to be saved, of upfront, long-term performance features are an important part of this. Everything that I hear my colleagues saying, both Chairman Burgess and Chairman Duncan, are exactly what's done. To suggest that somehow this isn't saving money or not making the appliances more efficient or making them less perform worse, none of these things are accurate. And I mean, I guess you could say whatever you want, but the bottom line is that this is what the department is required to do. And for us to substitute as members of Congress and say that's not what they're doing, when they set forth all this in written form and explain all this in their analysis, I just think is wrong. I don't understand how you can make those conclusions based on the facts that are presented by the Department of Energy. I don't think this is the last time we're going to have this debate. As you know, Chairman Burgess, since you're on the Energy and Commerce Committee, we had, I think, 6 bills. One was this one from Congresswoman Lesko that is more general, and then there were 5 for each of the appliances. So I suspect we're going to get, every week or at some point we're going to get, this come back on refrigerators and then dishwashers and then, I just think that we have better things to do here than talk about, the so-called radicalism of appliance efficiency standards. I don't think there's anything radical at all. I think that what this administration is doing by the book is trying to save money, trying to create more efficiency, better performance, and at the same time try to address the climate crisis by not having more impact on our climate that creates more greenhouse gases and more extreme weather conditions that certainly are not in the interest of the American people or of anyone. So again, I would just ask that that this legislation be rejected, to me, it just makes no sense, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentleman. Gentleman yields back. I thank both of you for your participation here today. I guess my only question is, it's almost like you included, Chairman Duncan, a cost-benefit analysis. This thing has to be worth, whatever efficiency measure there is, it has to actually be worth it to the consumer. I mean, that seems like a good common sense restriction to put in legislation like this. Why wouldn't that be okay, Mr. Plone?
But my point I'm trying to make is that's already the case, right? And I'm not trying to be difficult, but you act like there's some kind of radical Green Deal initiative here. These efficiency standards and the way they go about deciding them have been around for years. This isn't the first time this has been done. This is nothing new.
Reclaiming my time, but the problem is if they don't deliver on the promise, then the poor consumer is the one who's stuck with it. I have no other questions. I'm going to yield to the gentlelady from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do want to say that I hear from my constituents about gas stoves. They ask me if we are really going to ban their gas stoves, whether it be a restaurant or a lot of the restaurants ask me about it, and private individuals. So it is an issue because I hear about it in my district. But Mr. Duncan, some folks contend that new standards must meet the requirements we impose in this bill already, and they argue that it's all about efficiency. But we still see the standards that would effectively ban gas stoves and other appliances, all at the cost to the taxpayer. And I'm just wondering if you could explain why is that? Why are they still pursuing?
Well, President Biden has said it, and Secretary Granholm has confirmed it many times. There's a war on fossil fuels. The administration does not want fossil fuels, so they want to ban all appliances that use fossil fuels, including gas stoves. We've already seen so many other appliances brought up. We've been right here in front of the Rules Committee talking about previous bans. Chairman Burgess mentioned cost-benefit analysis. Well, I can do it for you. The appliances will cost more. Electricity prices are higher because of the Biden war on energy. So the appliance costs more, and the payback period is extended further in the future from any savings that might come about because the energy prices that consumers are paying now are much higher. So you're extending the payback period, you're paying more for energy because of the Biden administration policies, and now you have to pay more for the appliance, which is driving the cost of the homes up. It's driving the cost of replacement appliances if you're a homeowner, or if you're a renter and you have to have your own appliances and you bring them in, you have to buy them, it's costing the consumer more. And I hear, like you do, from my consumers, my constituents, restaurants, individuals, homeowners, especially the younger first-time home buyers that are trying to buy the first appliances, and it's just costing them an extraordinary amount of money, and they see what the Biden administration is doing with energy prices and with appliance prices.
Well, and Mr. Duncan, I appreciate that because I was going to ask you a little bit about the economic impact it's having, but I think you expressed that well. And so I guess I will yield back to myself, and I will, call on Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me just say, I mean, we're hearing some discussion about Secretary Granholm is obsessed with this and obsessed with that. I think what they're obsessed with is finding ways to save the consumers money and saving them undue costs. That's what this is all about. These efficiency standards that have already been put into place, Mr. Plone pointed out, are going to save consumers billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in the next several years. So I would rather do that, save consumers money, than merely pad the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Pallone, and thank you, Mr. Duncan, for being here. And for the sake of moving things along, I'm not going to repeat what I said in my opening statement, but it just seems like Republicans think energy efficiency is a bad thing, which is at odds with what the vast majority of Americans think. But putting that aside, Mr. Duncan, are you aware that this bill was noticed to come before the Rules Committee 2 weeks ago?
Could you repeat that?
Are you aware that this bill that we're now talking about was noticed to come before the Rules Committee 2 weeks ago?
I'm not. That's above my pay grade, sir.
Well, it was. And are you also aware that the committee planned to bring up 4 other appliance-related bills at the time, in addition to the one that we're currently considering?
I'm fine with that and wish they would bring them all up.
Okay.
Because there is a war on the American consumer.
I guess my question to you is why the change? I mean, you're here on behalf of the House leadership to talk about this appliance, why this appliance bill should come to the floor. Can you explain to us why the 4 other appliance bills are not being considered again, but this one is?
Again, that's a question for leadership. That's above my pay grade. I'm a lowly subcommittee chairman on energy, but I will say this bill came through regular order through subcommittee and full committee after hearings of markup.
Are you aware what the titles of the other bills were that were supposed to come before this committee?
Again, I'm
Well,
not.
let me read you the titles. One of them was the Liberty in Laundry Act. Another was the Refrigerator Freedom Act. And here's why I think we're not considering those bills, because I think they're an embarrassment to this institution. I mean, it seems to me Republican leadership probably realized the irony of bringing up a bill about freedom for refrigerators while simultaneously taking freedom away from millions of women in this country by overturning Roe versus Wade. And maybe they realized it was a bad look to talk about liberty in laundry while simultaneously trying to take away liberty for people who want to use IVF. And I would just say that when we use words like freedom and liberty, this is the United States Congress. These are words that are written into our founding documents, ideas Americans have fought and died for. In Ukraine right now, soldiers and civilians are being killed because they are standing up for these very principles. And when your side throws those words around and talks about refrigerator freedom, it cheapens them. And it degrades those words and it degrades this institution. So I'm glad that Republicans realized how silly and frivolous these bills are and that they pulled them from today's hearing. I'm not sure that they are banned, they will be pulled forever, but I'm going to take that as a semi-positive sign because, I mean, it was laughable, given all that is happening in this country and all that is happening in this world, that the bills that contain the words freedom and liberty are about household appliances. I mean, we have to start getting serious around here about what is important and what is not. And again, bills that are aimed at trying to save consumers money, trying to promote energy efficiency, yes, trying to wean us off of fossil fuels. I mean, I think we can have a debate on that, but to use words like freedom and liberty with regard to refrigerators and wash machines, I just think is an embarrassment. I don't have any questions. Yeah, I'll yield to Mr. Pallone.
Well, let me just say I totally agree with you. In fact, when I saw those labels for the bills in the committee, I was wondering if maybe, somebody had substituted them for the real thing. I was kind of surprised that the Republicans themselves use those labels for the bills, to be perfectly honest. But I just wanted to say quickly 2 things you raised. One is the whole issue of affordability. And, I really believe that in our committee, we have highlighted affordability, not only for, to make, save costs on appliances, but also on things like the Affordable Connectivity Fund to help people pay for their internet, to subsidize and help people pay for their health care. I mean, the list goes on, and that's been a hallmark, I think, of the Democrats' initiative in our committee. So I appreciate you bringing up the whole issue of affordability, because that's what we're all about as Democrats. And then the last thing I wanted to say is, one of the things that was quite clear when the Secretary of Energy came before us last week, I believe, was that this administration believes in all of the above energy policy, right? Mr. Duncan, Chairman Duncan and Chairman Burgess talked about the war on fossil fuels. More oil, more natural gas is being produced now with this administration than any time before. We just came through this committee to a nuclear package to try to expand the use of nuclear power. Now, not everybody agrees with that. The fact of the matter is we're increasing everything, right? But we also prioritize trying to move towards renewables because we think that we need to move towards renewables because the day of fossil fuels is, at some point, there aren't going to be any fossil fuels around anymore, and they continue to contribute to climate change and increased greenhouse gases. So we want to prioritize renewables. But by no means did the Secretary suggest anything other than an all-of-above policy. So this idea of a war on energy is just nonsense, frankly. So I yield back. But
No, and
for
I
your
thank
time.
you. And again, as I said in my opening statement, energy efficiency is not a bad thing. Saving consumers money is not a bad thing. Only, in a Congress that is run by Republicans, are those things considered undesirable. And again, I would just end by, again, repeating that whoever is coming up with your agenda, freedom for refrigerators and liberty in laundry, ought to be reminded that this is the United States Congress. This is not Saturday Night Live. This is supposed to be a serious place, and it's about time we acted like it. With that, I yield back.
I would call on Mr. Norman.
I'm going to agree with Mr. McGovern, and we seldom agree, Mr. McGovern, but the fact this is silly and the fact that the seriousness, why don't we get serious? This is a silly attempt by the Biden administration to make the American consumer buy something. Jeff said it just right, at what cost? And I sat through a previous, we shouldn't even be having to deal with letting government bureaucrats tell consumers what they want. And the fact that, you mentioned getting serious, what about and you mentioned the deaths in Ukraine, what about the seriousness at the border? What about the deaths of the Americans through fentanyl? What about the crime that's running that this administration is promoting? What about that? And you talk about the Constitution, I think it's we the people decide, not bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. And Jeff, you hit it just right. At what cost? You can make, I was talking to a liberal not long ago, and they wanted to make a car so no one gets killed in it. You can do that at what cost? These electric vehicles are a joke. Roger Williams is burying it. He's literally burying a car because no one wants it. You can try to force government down the throats of the American people. That's why they're sick and tired of this administration doing this. It's an assault on our very freedoms. It is about freedom. And it's being taken from us. And God only help us if we have to stand another 4 years of this insanity. That's what it is. To think, I would have never in my wildest dreams would think the government was, and you, Mr. Plum, you quote trillions of dollars. You let the American people decide, pick what they want. That's freedom. And, the bureaucrats that are saying this is so wise, that's not their expertise. The people want government out of their lives, out of the way, and get back to the basics, which is why his approval, this Biden administration approval numbers have not hit rock bottom yet. They're sick of it. So to even have to deal with this, the Biden administration is making us deal with it, and thank God we're fighting it. I yield to Jeff.
I think Mr. Norman's exactly right. Mr. McGovern, when Republicans talk about freedom and liberty, we talk about it in the spirit of our founding fathers. And that's true liberty and freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to innovate, freedom to be entrepreneurs, freedom from big government. And what we see now in the United States of America is a far cry from what our founding fathers envisioned. They envisioned a small central federal government handling 17 enumerated powers defined in the Constitution of the United States. We're way beyond 17 enumerated powers in the United States government now. A government which is telling American consumers and manufacturers what they can buy and what they can manufacture. Because Big Brother thinks best. Big Brother knows best. We're from the government and we're here to help. That's not what the founding fathers envisioned. They envisioned a very limited federal government. And we have a free market capitalist society. Regardless of what the socialists around this country and around this town want to believe, we still have a free market capitalist society. And innovators and entrepreneurs are building the products that American consumers want, but yet we see a continued push by big government down on the American people, telling them what kind of cars they have to drive, telling them what kind of appliances they can buy, the only appliances they can buy, telling them they can't catch rainwater off their own roof for use in their homes. That's what too much government gets you. We get situations like this where big government has said, you can't have a gas stove. Even though gas is very efficient for cooking, ask every restaurateur out there, they would rather have a gas stove cooking the meals that we eat at those restaurants. Consumers would rather have a gas stove in their home to cook on and would rather have something that they can rely on in the dead of winter when the electricity has gone out because snow has taken down a power line. They still have a gas appliance in there to help heat their home, whether it's a gas HVA system or whether it's a gas logs in the fireplace that they can rely on. And natural gas is affordable, and we're blessed in this country with an abundance of it, but yet we see big government continued to tamp down the fossil fuel industry because of some sort of political agenda embracing climate change. And it's time to get the big government off the throat of the American people and the American manufacturing. That's too much government, and I'll tell you again, when we talk about freedom and liberty, we talk about it in the spirit of our founding fathers, and that's a limited central government, not what we're seeing today. And I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall my history where Thomas Jefferson or any of the founders talked about freedom for refrigerators or liberty in laundry.
No, they talked about freedom and liberty.
The gentleman talked earlier about the low approval rating of the current president. You know what the approval rating of Congress is? It's something like 15%.
It should be lower than that.
Right, well, you guys are in charge. It should be lower than that. I agree with you. But I just point that out because I'm not sure how low anybody can go. We're leading, you guys are leading that way. So anyway, I thank you, the gentleman, for yielding, and I'll yield back.
Well, all I'll say is freedom is quickly being eroded by this administration. If I have to get asked one more time, gas appliances came up. Why are gas prices where they are now? Why are we having to fight for everything? There's been no savings on anything. Everything under this administration is up. And Americans, the only good news is they're sick and tired of it. And to cap it all off, at the end of this month, the World Health Organization, this administration will lock us down. If he gets by with it, we'll lose our sovereignty over give it to countries that are controlled by China. It's a joke. And if it'd be so serious, it would be a joke if it wasn't so serious. So we'll fight. And the good news is there's a number of us here that are going to fight this. And there's a growing number of Americans who are sick and tired of government. Thank you for both of you for being here, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Ms. Scanlon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like the ranking member, I sort of had hoped that the House Republicans had abandoned the attempt to stir up a war on household appliances. But here we are, considering the Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act. You know, for nearly 50 years, the Department of Energy has saved Americans hundreds of billions of dollars by setting prudent, energy-efficient appliance standards. Consumers like these standards. I look for these standards when I buy appliances for my house. Nobody's ever forced me to give up an appliance. They die of their own accord eventually. But knowing what I can expect from a new appliance because the government has established some standards is pretty important. And anyone concerned about the environment appreciates the fact that there's some standards by which we can judge the products that we are looking for. That helps our freedom to decide what we want to purchase and what we want to bring into our homes. But we're seeing that every time the Department of Energy sets a new standard, we get hysterics from House Republicans. The bill's sponsor says that the Biden administration is waging a war on everyday household appliances, which is ridiculous. We're talking about energy efficiency standards for new products coming out 5 or 10 years in the future. And the current proposed standards, once implemented, are projected to save households over $570 billion in reduced energy costs. And yet Republicans are trying to persuade Americans that Big Brother's coming for your toaster. This is crazy. This is a waste of time for the government. It's a waste of time for Congress. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars. And as several people on both sides of the aisle have pointed out, we have much more important things that we should be attending to. So what's clear is that it is an election year, and people like to make speeches and say that they are protecting freedoms when it has nothing to do with that. There's no record for Republicans to run upon, as some of our colleagues on that side of the aisle have said. So what we're seeing is theatrics about liberty for laundry and freedom for refrigerators and gas stove wars, and it's all a lot of nonsense. And I really wish that we could get back to some regular order and actually doing the people's business here. Mr. Pallone, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just want to say, kind of reiterate what you say, as the ranking member on the Energy and Commerce Committee, we deal with so many consumer issues, healthcare issues, energy issues, and I get very frustrated because I think that the American consumer expects the government, contrary to what Chairman Duncan said, to set standards, right? So, I get people come up to me and say, well, you're selling vitamins and I guess they're safe. And I'll say, well, to some extent, you have food safety. I assume that when I go to the grocery store that that's safe to eat. Well, yes and no, because if you start basically getting rid of standards, right? We're not going to review food safety. We're not going to review appliances. We're not going to review various consumer goods. Then people aren't going to feel safe, and that they can actually go and buy these things and they're safe and healthy. And it's exactly what you said. They think that the standards are being set and this refrigerator is more efficient or this refrigerator or dishwasher is safe to use. And if we follow the philosophy that I hear from Chairman Duncan and some of the Republican members, they're like laissez-faire, sell whatever you want. Sell a medicine that's fake, sell food that's got botulism, sell a refrigerator that doesn't work, and that's okay. This is the market system. I don't know anybody who believes that. I mean, maybe there are some, but I think that the government, that people and consumers expect us to actually regulate things so that they're safe, they're efficient, they save money, and it's almost like they want to step in and say we either shouldn't have that or somehow Congress should decide on the regulation or every detail, which is not possible. So I just appreciate what you're saying. I don't think people want to operate in the world that the Republicans have just envisioned. That's not what people think as consumers. But I yield back.
Well, when we received this raft of bills, most of which have now been withdrawn, perhaps because their names were so ridiculous, I was really struck by the fact that, first of all, it was the same bill, just kind of cut and pasted multiple times. And it emphasized that there should not be an increased cost to consumers to purchase or replace or recycle or do whatever with these appliances. But what was striking was it left out of the calculation the savings that a consumer could get from having this energy efficient appliance. So it very firmly put its thumb on the scale for taking energy efficiency out of the equation, which, I mean, obviously, as we've all said, has been part of the equation, is certainly part of the equation for many consumers when they consider whether they're buying a new car or a new appliance or whatever, is how efficient it is. How much is it going to cost to run from day to day? And I think that's an important thing that the government can help people understand and decide. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Langworthy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Duncan, there's been no shortage of mockery by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle about the names of bills, but I mean, it's very rich and ironic coming from people that champion something called the Inflation Reduction Act that did nothing but hypercharge the economy and send inflation through the roof. But we wouldn't be discussing these if we didn't have to go toe-to-toe with the Biden administration's regulatory onslaught against various appliances, from gas stoves to refrigerators to dishwashers. And these are certainly things that we're hearing from our constituents. Consumer groups have estimated that under the Biden administration's regulatory regime, that American households will be forced to shoulder thousands of dollars in upgrades as the cost of appliances goes up to meet these ever more strident standards. And I don't think that the American people would agree that these are appliances that are lasting longer. They're actually lasting shorter windows of time in households. Do you think that hitting American families with thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars in extra costs for basic needs like for their cooking and cleaning and air conditioning and furnaces, should that be taken lightly, as our colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to be? Because that's not what I'm hearing from my constituents. Anything you'd like to add there?
Americans are already paying, as Mr. Norman said, a lot of money under this administration because of inflation. The inflation that we see is direct result of the Biden administration's policies that started on day one as a war on energy. Energy costs factor into everything that's manufactured in this country. From the manufacturing cost, supply chain issues, electricity cost to run the manufacturing plant, transportation cost that are passed on to the consumer from the transportation companies to the retailer and then to the consumer. And they're tired of it. This is another example where these regulations will limit choices and drive up cost. There's no argument that these new appliances under these standards proposed by the administration will cost more money. And that extends the payback for paying for those appliances much longer. So, this is an example of the Biden administration putting climate and efficiency agenda over everything else. And that agenda has affected everything in Americans' lives. They want Americans to use less energy, but they don't care about the cost.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. I represent constituents. Many live in rural communities in the far western part of New York State. In a state where Democrat-run government has made the decision to one-up the Biden administration and is pushing for even more radical policies to decarbonize and to raise efficiency standards, service operators, utilities. Everyone in our state has indicated that this will cost New Yorkers upwards of $20,000 to even $30,000 to upgrade homes. This is the energy future that the Biden administration, through regulatory action at the Department of Energy, the EPA, and others, is working to foist on the backs of all of the American people. So with that in mind, Representative Duncan, our colleagues on the other side of the dais here today have warned that H.R. 6192 will hobble the Department of Energy's ability to issue emissions-reducing conservation standards. Do you think that slowing down the regulatory machinery within our federal agencies is something that the American people are deeply concerned about?
Absolutely, they're concerned about it. And they should be concerned about the Biden administration's whole-of-government approach to pursuing climate policy over everything else. The energy conservation standards we're talking about here today, they put the climate change considerations over the interest of the American consumer. As I said in my rant earlier, it's too much government. Americans are getting fed up with so much government, and they want, as Mr. McGovern said, they want freedom and liberty. They want the freedom to choose. They want their liberty to innovate, create products that the American consumer wants. As Mr. Norman said, Congressman Williams from Texas is an auto dealer. He's choking on the EVs that he can't sell, that's forced down from the dealers, from the manufacturers to the dealerships, and there's no market for it because the consumer doesn't want it. The consumer wants something else. And I hear that all over South Carolina from the dealers we know. And so the government wants to tell you what kind of car to drive, what kind of appliance to use, that you can't catch rainwater off your house to utilize in your garden or any other uses on your homestead. They want to tell you how to cook food. They want to end your use of gas appliances. Why? It's because they don't like fossil fuels. Joe Biden has said it. He was going to end fracking. It was a war on energy from day one. And this is just another cog in that big wheel of big government from the Biden administration pushing a certain climate agenda, and the American people are paying for it.
Well, thank you, Representative Duncan. I appreciate you reiterating these points today and sharing why this legislation is important. I've spoken to folks in my state who work in HVAC, plumbing and electrical, and they've recounted to me how difficult it is to explain to someone, especially seniors on fixed incomes, who, they're retired, they're pinching pennies, but because radical decisions made by unelected bureaucrats, here in Washington or in our state capital in Albany, that the cost of replacing their furnace or other basic appliances just went up by thousands of dollars, and they don't have the same solutions they would have had a year or two ago. For the sake of ensuring an affordable and reliable future for the American people, we need to do everything we can to put the brakes on this administration's Green New Deal agenda. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Neguse?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chairman Duncan and Ranking Member Pallone, for your testimony and for being here today. Mr. Duncan, I don't want to belabor the point here, but I listened with great interest to your primer on the constitutional order of our country and the principles of limited government as you see it, and your perceptions about supposed overreach by the federal government in this case that apparently was the impetus for the Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act. I think House Republicans at least were wise enough to keep the rest of their bills, the Refrigerator Freedom Act and the like, from the floor this week. But nonetheless, I listened to that primer with great interest. Some of the words you used, just in response to my colleague from New York's questions, were too much government, freedom to choose, which of course is, ironic given the position of House Republicans in undermining the right, the freedom to make one's own health reproductive decisions. But I guess what I really would like for you to help expound to me is where you draw the line when it comes to what you describe as too much government. You said there's too much government in selecting one's toaster, I guess, or one's refrigerator, apparently, or one's washer and dryer. You went through this litany of examples. Where do you draw the line?
Where do I draw the line on what?
Yeah, how do you see, you take issue with the federal government's role, in this case, with respect to the bill that you all have proposed. Where do you draw the line as to how much government is too much government?
Well, there's 17 enumerated powers in the United States Constitution, and I think government has well exceeded that. I think a return to a smaller, limited federal government is better.
Okay.
That's how our founders envisioned this.
That's helpful. That's what I was hoping you would say. You believe there's too much government in appliances or the selection thereof. Do you think there's too much government in baseball?
I don't think government has a role in baseball.
You don't think government has a role in baseball? That's fascinating. Are you familiar with the Competition in Professional Baseball Act?
Well, there's some antitrust laws.
No, I didn't ask you that. I asked if you're familiar with that bill. I mean, I hope you'd be familiar with it because it's your bill.
I am, yeah.
Right? Yeah. You authored the Competition in Professional Baseball Act. That bill does what? It amends the Clayton Act to ultimately eliminate one of the antitrust exemptions that exists for professional baseball. You're familiar with the Clayton Act, yes?
I am.
And the Clayton Act is designed to do what? Protect consumers, is that right? Is the Clayton Act part of the 17 enumerated powers of the federal government under the Constitution as you see it, that you hold so true and fast to?
Probably.
Probably? Okay, so looks like we found an exception. Maybe we can go down the list of some others. You see my point, Mr. Duncan.
I said it's too much government.
Oh, yeah, I understand, but apparently too much government in the case of the bill that you proposed, but not too much government in the case of professional baseball, where apparently you've introduced a bill, or at least you introduced a bill.
Trying to roll back
Hold on,
some of
Mr.
government.
Duncan, I'll finish
Just
my
like this is
statement,
trying.
and I'll give you an opportunity to respond, in which you introduced a bill in the last Congress to give the FTC more powers so that it could regulate professional baseball. So you could imagine, I think, my surprise, and I suspect for those who are watching, their surprise to hear you defend liberty for refrigerators, but then demand that the federal government intervene in the regulation of professional baseball. I find that a bit disconnected from the philosophy that you've articulated. But I'm happy to...
Well, there's already antitrust laws out there that baseball has to operate under. And trying to roll back some of that is lessening government's involvement.
Yeah, again, that's not the nature of your bill. The bill provides for an
The law's
amendment
already-
of
the laws already exist.
Let me finish my statement here. The Clayton Act, which, as you know, is over 100 years old, does not include baseball, and the courts, going back a generation, have ruled that professional baseball is not subject to the antitrust laws of the United States of America. You, sir, have introduced a bill to mandate that professional baseball be subject to the antitrust laws of the United States and to give the Federal Trade Commission the powers to regulate it thereof. You shouldn't be embarrassed by it. That's your position.
I'm not, because there were antitrust violations. And so the antitrust laws, I didn't write. The
I hear you.
antitrust laws were on the books.
And apparently you believe
And
that
baseball was
it's in
given
the
an
interest
exemption.
of the American public for the federal government to have a role to protecting consumers, which you've spent the better part of the last half hour
Well,
attacking that very
antitrust
view.
laws fall
So-
under commerce, which the federal government enumerated powers to
Sure,
regulate.
sure. Well, you have a broader view of the Commerce Clause than certainly than apparently the framers that you were describing previously. But to the extent that you care to jump in, Ranking Member Pallone, about the regulation of professional baseball, you're welcome to. But
I just think, look, this kind of goes back to what Congresswoman Scanlon said, right? The public assumes that the government has a role in protecting consumers, right? Whether it's baseball, it's food safety, it's appliances, whatever. And so I think that to suggest that there's some kind of ideological view that says that the government shouldn't play that role is not the case. That's what the public assumes. And they'd be shocked to hear, I think, some of the statements here today suggesting that, we just have this market economy where anything goes and the federal government shouldn't step in and regulate things. That's not what I hear from my constituents. They want us to regulate problems if there's, I don't know what there is, but let's assume there's some kind of shady dealings in baseball. They want to make sure that when they go to the game, there's fair play. Same thing with food safety, same thing with appliances. They rely on us to help them as consumers, and to suggest that that somehow is not what the framers intended, I don't agree.
couldn't say better than the ranking member, and couldn't agree with you more. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, thanks, the gentleman. Gentleman yields back to you. Gentleman from Georgia is now recognized for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just point out that I think those who talk about the cost savings, they're not factoring in the increased cost of the appliance. I can tell you, as somebody who's been shopping for an ice maker over the last several weeks, it costs today about twice what it did just 5 years ago to buy one. And one of the issues for the American consumer today is a lot of the newer appliances can't be serviced the way the old appliances could be. And so I can tell you, I don't get rid of my old appliances. I've got a freezer that's 15 years old, and I'll repair it until it rusts all the way out, because you can't repair a lot of the new appliances at a reasonable cost. So I'm not going to belabor this point. I'm going to mention this to you, Mr. Pallone, because I want you to know why many of us who are conservationists, don't trust what comes out of the far left in Washington, D.C. In my home state, they're cutting down thousands of acres of forest land. Thousands of acres of forest land. That land was sold for significantly more than it was actually worth because of the tax subsidies to put solar panels in. Now, there's no way that a fact-based, decision-making environmentalist would suggest that it's in the best interest of the environment to cut down the forest lands of this country to put up solar panels. It's just not. And so that's why we don't trust what comes out of liberal administrations. And that's just an example. It's not your fault. But I'm just, I don't understand why the Biden administration can't just leave us alone. I really don't. And with that, I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, thanks, the gentleman from Georgia. Are there any other members seeking questions for this panel? If not, I want to thank you for your attendance today, and the witnesses are excused. And I would like to welcome our second panel.